So the Jeff Johns saga continues.
Every time I think I'm out, they pull me back in.
This time it's Grace Randolph saying that Jeff Johns went behind Zack Snyder's back to hire Joss Whedon. Now think what you want about Grace Randolph. The last video I made about her, she was talking about how the Snyder Cut was being delayed, and a lot of you didn't like that news. A lot of you said that she was making it up, you don't trust her, she's not reliable. But now that she's saying that Jeff Johns went behind Zack Snyder's back, all of a sudden, everything she says is true and reliable. It's really interesting how that works. You know, 1 second you don't believe anything she says, and the next second you believe her full-heartedly because it's something you want to hear. I said it before and I'll say it again. When it comes to all these scoopers and all these people with, claimed inside sources, you have to use common sense. And when new information comes about, you have to take that into consideration. And some things Grace Randolph says about Jeff Johns completely contradicts itself. And I'll just read this line right here. Inexplicably, Jeff Johns is still one of the producers on the movie, that movie being Batgirl, which is still in development. And she also says, even though he is widely disliked at Warner Brothers. Well, that strikes me as a big contradiction. If he's not liked at Warner Brothers, why is he still producing on these movies? And if you go to the article at Cosmic Book News, I'll link it down below. They go on to say that Johns is still involved with the DC movies because his contract with DC and the characters makes it so Johns has to be a producer. Jeff Johns is the intellectual creator of many characters in the DC pantheon, not the main superheroes. He's notably credited for creating characters like Stargirl and Atrocitus and LaFreeze and a lot of, Green Lantern villains. But he's not credited with creating Batgirl. So that's not a reason why he would still be producing Batgirl. And Jeff Johns is also producing Wonder Woman as well as writing the screenplay because Patty Jenkins liked him enough to bring him back, which is also a giant contradiction to the whole everybody at Warner Brothers dislikes him. But let's go back to what Grace Randolph says. She says Jeff Johns was banished from Birds of Prey, which is hysterical because Birds of Prey was a complete shit show, and maybe he shouldn't have been banished. Maybe Jeff Johns' input would have helped Birds of Prey. Just saying. Grace Randolph also says that Jeff Johns was banished to the DC streaming service, and maybe he can redeem himself with Stargirl, even though Jeff Johns has produced Titans and Doom Patrol, the two flagship shows of the DC streaming service. So WB banished Jeff Johns to the DC Universe streaming service to make the DC streaming service more successful? You see how this is falling apart? Did Warner Brothers not want the DC streaming service to succeed? If they really didn't like Jeff Johns and they thought he was not good at all, why would they give him free reign to make these shows on the DC streaming service and also make Stargirl if he really was that disliked? So obviously many contradictions. Grace Randolph, she has been right in the past. She's also been very wrong. If you go look at everything she said about Birds of Prey, all that shit was bullshit. And I do agree that Jeff Johns had a hand in changing Justice League. I do believe that. But what I also believe is that he was forced into that position because of the reception of BVS. Because Jeff Johns had no problem working with Zack Snyder for Batman vs. Superman.
Well, the Batman is the closest, I think, to the comic book Batman that's ever appeared on the screen anywhere.
That's great. That's great. So do you think that comic book movie should be rated R, or do you think that DC shouldn't go that route?
I think it depends on whatever the creative says.
He praises Zack Snyder's Batman. He praises Zack Snyder's Batman, saying Batman in BVS is the most comic accurate Batman that's ever been on screen. Those are Jeff Johns' words. So my interpretation of all this, which is all this is all just speculation. Whether you think he's the mastermind behind everything or you think he's just a victim of circumstance, either way, it's all speculation until Jeff Johns says something or Zack Snyder says something. And think about this. We haven't even got Jeff Johns' side of it. That will be a super interesting interview if anyone can get that. Because so far, everything we've heard about Jeff Johns is coming from Snyder's camp. It's coming from people that are friends of Zack Snyder. In fact, that might just be Grace Randolph's source, is somebody close to Zack Snyder. That might just be her source. Of course, I don't know, just speculation. But going back to BVS, Jeff Johns didn't really have a problem promoting that movie and helping Zack Snyder with that movie. It's only after the reception that Batman vs. Superman gets, that's when the studio heads decide to change Justice League. And if you're Jeff Johns at the time, he was chief creative officer of DC Entertainment, of DC Comics. His main job is to protect the brand of DC Comics and the DC characters. So when a movie comes out that's universally hated, that gets an overwhelming negative reaction for a full year, and studio heads panic and want to change Justice League because they're not confident in what Zack Snyder has. If you're Jeff Johns, your loyalty is to DC Comics, not Zack Snyder. And if we remember the Never Compromise image that Zack Snyder posted in February of 2017, we can infer from that Zack Snyder was fighting with the studios the whole year during Justice League's production and during post-production. Zack Snyder's daughter doesn't commit suicide till the end of March, and Zack Snyder doesn't leave till the middle of May. So the studio was already well in the process of compromising Zack's vision, of changing the movie, and Zack was fighting really hard against that. And Jeff Johns probably lost confidence in Zack Snyder. The same with Ben Affleck. Ben Affleck also lost confidence in Zack Snyder. There's a through line with the story, and that is everybody lost confidence in what Zack Snyder was doing.
I mean, there's a lot of it that we shot, but the actual idea, the hard idea, the scary idea, we never filmed because the studio was like, that's crazy. And we were so insecure at the time after this movie came out, we were just like, I guess it is crazy. Like, we're fucking nuts.
After Batman vs. Superman came out. If Batman vs. Superman was just a moderate success, if it just had like a 60% Rotten Tomatoes, we wouldn't even be here right now. Zack Snyder's cut would be in theaters, they would have supported him. It's the fact that Man of Steel got a mixed reaction from critics, and then Batman vs. Superman got totally trashed. That's what led to all the changes on Justice League. And the studio was going to do it regardless of what Zack Snyder wanted, and regardless of what Jeff Johns wanted. So what do you do for Jeff Johns? You gotta protect the DC brand, you have to stay on, and you have to work with the studio to get the movie out. And if you noticed, nobody is proud of the Justice League theatrical cut. Jeff Johns hasn't even mentioned Justice League since it came out. He's not proud of it. No one's proud of it. Jeff Johns is not even a co-writer on the theatrical cut of Justice League. For the story and screenplay, it's Zack Snyder, Chris Terrio, and Josh Whedon. Those are the credited people with the screenplay and story for Justice League. Now the question is, who hired Josh Whedon? Grace Randolph is saying that Jeff Johns was involved in getting Josh Whedon on board, which at the time is not a bad decision, especially with all the turmoil that's going on with Zack Snyder and everybody losing faith. What other director could have come onto the movie that could have gave the movie any chance of being good? The most well-known script doctor in Hollywood, Josh Whedon, that's famous for the Avengers films. On paper, it's a really good idea to bring in Josh Whedon to help shape Justice League. And of course, when Zack Snyder leaves the production after his daughter's suicide, then there's no one to fight against all the compromises happening, and that's how we get Justice League in theaters. And of course, they had to get Justice League out in theaters because all the main executives of Warner Brothers were going to get bonuses. And if Justice League didn't come out in 2017, they weren't going to get those bonuses. So I imagine a lot of them were just hoping Justice League was passable, but clearly that wasn't the case. And Jeff Johns stepped down as DC Chief Creative Officer and DC President shortly after Justice League. And since he stepped down as president, I don't know about you, but the quality of DC films hasn't exactly gone up. We got the Joker, but that was always going to get made because it wasn't that much to make. And I'm going to repeat myself right now, but I think it bears repeating. If Jeff Johns is so disliked by everybody at Warner Brothers, why the hell is he still working on these films? Because of his contract with DC? What exactly does his contract entail? That he produce every DC film? We don't even know that situation. That's just something Comic Book News just threw into the article. No one's read Jeff Johns' contract. There's no way to know what the hell the contract says. But once again, if everybody hated him, he wouldn't be so lucrative in all the jobs he has, all the TV shows he's doing, all the movies he's involved in. So, like I said in some other videos, Whether you like Jeff Johns or you hate him, you have to deal with him because he's going to be involved on a lot of DC properties for quite a while. And if Zack Snyder ever gets a chance to do Justice League 2 and 3, Jeff Johns might be there with him doing it. Or Jim Lee might be there doing it with him. And guess who's best friends with Jim Lee? Jeff Johns. So, think what you want to think. It's coming from Grace Randolph. She's been right before. She's been wrong before. But what she says about Jeff Johns going behind Zack Snyder's back to get Josh Whedon involved, that may be the case because enough people are saying it. And I mean, if you say something enough times, it becomes reality anyway. But if that's the case, then think about this. If that is the case, then Jeff Johns had to convince other people to get Josh Whedon on board behind Zack Snyder's back, correct? He had to convince Toby Emmerich. He had to convince Kevin Tsujihara. And they all thought it was a good idea. It was a collaborative effort that fucked up Justice League. They were never going to let Zack Snyder's movie happen. If they actually cared about Zack Snyder's cut of Justice League, we would have seen the Snyder Cut by now. They really tried to bury it for 2 years because they thought they made the right decision by not going through with it. Because of the negative reception Batman vs. Superman got, they thought that same thing was going to happen with Justice League. And for all intents and purposes, it might have. We don't know. Justice League was going to end on a cliffhanger. We don't know if people were going to like the cliffhanger. We don't know how people were going to respond to this movie. Especially after Batman vs. Superman. There are a lot of Zack Snyder haters among the critics, and they all would have pounced on Justice League just as much as they did on Batman vs. Superman. At least that's what I believe. I still think Jeff Johns is a victim of circumstance. I believe he did the best he did in the situation that he was in, because if he didn't, roll with the punches, he was going to get shit canned. And he was going to get forced out a lot like how WB was forcing out Zack Snyder to begin with. And it all stems from the reaction to Batman vs. Superman. But anyway, that's it for now. Comment below. Let me know what your thoughts. I need an interview from Jeff Johns. And I need an interview from Zack Snyder. I need to know exactly what happened. I am sick of all the hearsay from just Snyder supporters. Because that's where all this info is coming from. It's coming from Snyder's camp. That's it. We're not hearing any other side of it. That's never good when you're just hearing one side of it, guys. Yes, Jeff Johns had a hand, but he wasn't the only hand. And he's getting pinned as the only guy responsible. And that's not right. But anyway, that's it for now. I'll see you all on the next one. Bye-bye.
I would read anything by Jeff Johns. Genius. I love him.
And I like the script. I wrote it with Jeff Johns, who I have a lot of respect for.
I would read anything by Jeff Johns. Genius. I love him.
All right, that's it for me. We're good, everybody.